Pour écouter cette session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour.
Barry Saleho.
On behalf of ICLEI Africa,
the African Centre for Cities,
Our Future Cities,
Red Cross Crescent Climate Centre,
and partners,
we're excited to welcome all of you
to the Rise Africa 2022 Action Festival.
Rise Africa has been growing since 2020
as a platform for thinkers,
doers,
and enablers
committed to inspiring action for sustainable cities.
This year's theme is
creativity.
For me, this means blending skills to be able to communicate the climate change complexity in rapidly urbanizing cities.
We are walking dynamites of creative expression, whether it be in the arts, in the sciences, or in tech.
There are so many people in the African continent who have a huge skill base and are creative in the way they approach challenges.
Creativity in Africa is about embracing our own. It's about dynamism and it's about embracing our indigenous knowledge.
I think agency is finding ways of giving power back to people, to groups, to young people, especially on a continent where it's a very young population.
One should be taking ownership and the responsibility to create an Africa that they would like to live in, as well as leave behind for the future generations.
I think what agency means to me is change from the ground up.
The importance of urgency is the recognition of the past and the recognition that we've lost time.
Urgency is about acting now to build more inclusive, productive, and resilient cities.
There's this need to creatively redesign and unlearn and explore new ways of thinking.
The festival is hosting 33 sessions
with 135 provocateurs
from across Africa and the world.
Every session aims to show new ideas,
showcase ongoing action,
and launch new initiatives, bringing participants together
to chart a new route forward.
We hope that the festival program will inspire you.
At the festival, we encourage you to showcase your business and projects,
build lasting partnerships,
unleash your creative potential,
commit to sustainable action.
Rise Africa is about translating ideas into action. What actions are you going to commit to this festival?
Before the session begins, it is important to note that you're being recorded.
And by participating, you are given the consent to be recorded.
All recordings will be available on the program page after the festival.
Creative expression is vital for creating new futures for our cities.
And so we invite you to enter this session in the spirit of creativity and dreaming.
L'Afrique est fatiguée de se retrouver dans l'obscurité. Elle est fatiguée de naviguer contre les courants de l'industrialisation. L'Afrique me dit qu'elle est fatiguée de se reposer au feu du bois. Il est donc temps de faire sauter les compteurs. Éclairons l'Afrique, libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel. Accélérons le rythme cardiaque de son développement. Libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel. Transformons l'enveloppe énergétique de l'Afrique pour stimuler son développement. Car la nature nous a tellement gratifiés de ses richesses. Changeons l'histoire, éclairons l'Afrique, donnons un bout de lumière à chaque foyer en Afrique est une possibilité. Changeons l'histoire, éclairons l'Afrique. Libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel.
Okay, I'm not quite sure how I follow that. Definitely not a poet and definitely not as imaginative as everybody in that video. You will see some familiar faces from the video on our panel today. But yeah, it's about what is that potential. So this session is looking at gender rights in UNA. And we'd like to welcome everybody that's joining us today. As I mentioned, for those who joined a bit earlier, my colleague is going to share via the chat the house rules, but it's just the basic old Zoom rules we all know by now. If we can keep ourselves on mute if we're not speaking in the panel. Once we get to the Q&A, if you can raise your hand and we can invite you to the floor. If you have any technical issues, please share them in the chat and our technical team can try and support you. We'll also share some social media hashtags and information in the chat that you're welcome to share if you want to share anything from today's session. And at the end, we will also share a survey if you'd like to help us inform and transform what's happening in cities and inform the program for next year. So with that, my name is Taryn Quayle. I'm from ICLEI Africa. We're based in South Africa, but we work with cities and subnational governments around Africa. We're part of the world's oldest and largest network of cities. And we'd like to share some time with you today in terms of one of our flagship projects called UNA. So for those who are not familiar with UNA basically translates to Urban Natural Assets. And it's a long-standing project that was funded by Sweet Bio, and it's been running for 8 years and has grown to be active in over 10 cities in 8 countries in Africa. And when we're talking about urban natural assets, we're really just looking at, within this program, how we can mainstream nature into urban planning, how we can bridge that divide, and how we can use that to build resilience at the local level. And when we're talking about UNA, about urban natural assets, about nature-based solutions, we're talking about nature, about biodiversity, about ecosystems. So the forests, the lakes, the wetlands that support our livelihoods within our communities, they provide benefits within our urban environments, and it's how we can better integrate with them and look at how they can inform our future planning to build resilience. The latest project under the UNA program is actually called UNA Resilience, and that will be running till 2024. And that project's been based and developed on the learnings of the previous UNA projects, that we need to focus really to foster resilience on 3 pillars, so planning, finance, and governance. And that to achieve all of them, we really actually have to adopt a project which has a fundamental human rights-based approach as a central pillar of the work that we're doing. And we all know that gender rights are central to this. And so we wanted to use this session as an opportunity to have a discussion about how we can move beyond those kind of archaic measures that we've used in previous years, the number of women attending workshops, the number of children, and really look at how we can seek impact and mainstreaming across our activities and our projects moving forward. So with that said, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce you to our panel. We have a very exciting panel. We may have some internet connectivity issues. So if I do drop off, we do have a backup moderator, and that's my colleague Erin. And if some of our panelists have issues, they might have to turn off their cameras, but we'll just roll with the punches and see what we can do. I'd like to keep this session relatively informal in the sense of allowing everybody their space and their time. So instead of reading out people's bios and introducing them, I'd like to give them the opportunity to tell you who they are briefly, so where they're coming from, who they are, and why they're here today. So we'll do that for each of our wonderful panelists, and then we'll start the panel. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Fumni. I'm starting with her because she knows Una. So Fumni, if you can introduce yourself and share a bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Taryn. I'm sorry, and also my network also seems to be a bit sketchy today, so I might have to turn off my camera in a bit. Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today in this very exciting session. Well done to the UNA team, and specifically to Taryn, Vanessa, and Erin for pulling this together. This is really fantastic. My name is Fumi, and I am a lawyer, basically, but specifically, I do human rights law, and I've practiced human rights law for over a decade now. And I have a PhD in international human rights protection. I serve at ICLEI as the focal point for rights-based approaches, which falls under the People and Planning Unit, a new unit which I also anchor within ICLEI. But outside of that, some of my job responsibilities also extend to being the project manager for UNA, a project which Taryn has very vividly and very correctly introduced to us all. But in brief, I'll say that what UNA does is to help local governments across Africa in addressing the daily challenges which they experience in revitalizing their urban natural assets. And as Taryn has said, we take a specifically human rights-based approach to this phase of UNA, which started last year and will carry on up until 2024. This phase of UNA is started off with 2 cities, the first city being Bo City in Sierra Leone, and the second being Cape Coast in Ghana. And we're actively involved in both cities currently to spread out to other cities as the years go by. And I think that is all about me. So far, so good. I'll hand over to the next person to introduce themselves. Sabrina?
Thanks for me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Ola. I work with the Pourquoi Design Initiative as a planning principal. Pourquoi Design Initiative is a non-profit organization working in Kenya, the US, and Sweden. I'm representing today the Kenya office. We work on community development and design, and we partner with under-resourced communities to enhance equity and activate unrealized potentials in their neighborhoods and cities. And in my role at KDI, I'm leading a project which is called Realizing Urban Nature-Based Solutions. This is also a project funded by SwedBio. And with this project, we are focusing on low-income neighborhoods within Nairobi and Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, trying to see how urban nature-based solutions can be implemented in low-income neighborhoods and also scaled up. I'm excited to be part of this panel today. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Sabrina. Can I hand over to Sarah? Sarah, are you able to introduce yourself?
Yes. Thank you very much, Vanessa. Thanks for this opportunity to be part of this wonderful panel. Sorry, I cannot display my video because of network issues. It doesn't show that part of my face. So I would like to share it. I'm Sarah Nandu. The National Federation of Uganda, and we are created members in national. And I have been at the forefront of mobilizing women, specifically in urban centers, and trying to ensure that women come out of that down there, but come for their rights to look forward to survival for their children and be able to live a decent home and a decent life. So a lot of mobilization, a lot of partnership, and then trying to engage with different partners to ensure that women voices are heard.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm not sure about for everybody else, but the line is a bit of a challenge. So maybe as a backup, would you be able to just write in the chat as well to share?
You didn't hear me?
It's breaking quite badly.
Sorry. Okay, let me put in the chat.
Okay.
As I work on the network issues.
Hopefully it gets better. I think the middle bit was easier, but Sarah's from SDI in Uganda. So Sarah, if you can just add in the chat, then everybody can see that, because yeah, the line wasn't the best. So I'd like to next introduce Nana Anna. Would you like to introduce who you are, where you're from? That would be great.
All right, thank you. I'm Nana Anna Wukakan, a lawyer and currently a legal officer with the University of Cape Coast, Ghana.
I have participated in the development and reviewing of several policies and working documents of the University of Cape Coast, such as the gender policy. I'm interested in issues of gender, and in my free time, I offer lectures upon request on concepts of marriage, divorce, letters of administration, probate, need for drafting wills to whichever group is interested. I'm currently a representative of the region to the Women's Forum of the Ghana Bar Association, and also the coordinator for in-house lawyers forum of the Ghana Bar Association. So yes, that's me.
Thanks, Nana Anna. And last but by no means least, can I introduce Veronica? Veronica, would you like to say hi and share who you are and where you're from? Veronica, you're just on mute.
Hello.
Hi.
Good day, everyone. I'm Veronica Josephine Fortune Bindi. I am currently the Chief Administrator of the Bo City Council, who, like you heard, partnering with ICLEI, and I have worked in other councils, district councils, the Moyamba District Council, the Makeni City Council, because we do rotate, there's a lot of experience. And of course, before I could join the local council, I have been a teacher. I joined the local council as a gender officer, went through the ranks, and now I am administrator and head of operations. We interface with a lot of ministries, departments, and agencies because our core mandate is bringing development to our people. And in doing so, we need to look at a lot of other issues, environmental issues, management of waste, and of course, revenue mobilization for the job to be done and done well. I am personally interested in gender issues because in my environment, I see the need to speak out on gender issues because of the prevailing situation. And only if we want the dynamics to change, then we have to speak on issues strategically, formally or non-formally, so that we create an impact that creates the change. Thank you. So I'm Veronica.
Thanks, Veronica. So wow, we have an amazing, I would say, formidable panel of amazing women. And I'm so excited for this session. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we'd like to kind of mix it up and go one person by one person, question by question. There's obviously themes between the questions, and that it gives everybody almost a chance to reflect, to discuss before we open it up for engagement with the audience. So the first panelist I'd like to call on again to kind of ground the discussion is Fumni. So can I ask you, in terms of women being key stakeholders, their voices are often underrepresented, and we know that sometimes their inputs are missing. So how do we really encourage equal representation and participation and really get that tangible co-development processes? So maybe you have some examples you can share from the UNA program in terms of what are these viable ways we can build gender representation into the co-creation process. So for me, over to you.
Thank you very much, Terry. I hope it doesn't begin to drag again, but if it does, I'll just turn off my video. I would like to forefront this discussion by saying women continue to be underrepresented across board in Africa and even outside of Africa because society continues to let it be so. So this is not a situation that occurs naturally. It's a situation that our society and our individual context, whether in Africa, whether in certain contexts outside of Africa, continues to reinforce. And I think that until we make conscious decisions to push back against that reinforcement, then we will continue to maintain the status quo. Like I had explained earlier, this phase of UNA decided that it was going to uniquely adopt, that we were going to uniquely adopt a human rights-based approach. And grounded in a human rights-based approach is a gendered approach. And because you cannot take the one away from the other. At the center of a rights-based approach is an approach that pays particular attention to vulnerable people. And we're all aware that within the context of Africa, women, girls, young people, the disabled, the elderly continue to be identified as vulnerable people. And because women in Africa are particularly vulnerable, and not just number one, because of societal context, societal norms and traditional practices up until today, but also because that the peculiar situation of women sees an intersection of vulnerabilities from culture, from tradition, and also the fact that Africa continues to have one of the highest rates of out of school girls amongst all of the continents. We have so many girls who are not going to school. And because we continue to have so many girls who are not going to school, they're growing up to become young women who cannot economically contribute to a certain level within society. And because of that, African women continue to be held back economically in terms of their contribution in society and to society. Also, the fact that we still continue to have very high rates of child marriage within Africa. And that's a problem because when you snatch a young girl as little as 10, 11, 12, and you ask her to be burdened with the concerns of marriage and of childbearing as early as that age, then you rob her of the opportunities to develop herself and to actually contribute to development in the broader context of things. Now, taking all of those views into concern, we decided that this phase of UNA, apart from centering a human rights-based approach, is also going to particularly center a gendered approach. And we all know that within the context of Africa, and specifically because we all come from very deeply patriarchal societies, or at least that is what the history would let us believe, that our societies were originally patriarchal, and today they exist as very deeply patriarchal societies. It's very difficult to introduce the gender discourse and to come into a new country and to say, we want to introduce a gendered approach into this project and everything we do. And we understood as an UNA team that our entry in these countries and within the context of UNA had to be carefully planned, and not from a deceptive point of view, but more from the point of view where the people themselves owned the narrative of why a gendered approach was necessary to urban natural assets. And I think that the peculiar thing which we've been able to achieve so far in UNA has been to help people to start, first of all, to begin to see human rights in Africa, not as an external thing that is being imported into African societies, but something that has always been part and parcel of African societies, even though it may have been iterated differently. When you think around concepts such as Ubuntu, for instance, in the South African society, it has elements of human rights. And when you look through the continent, you begin to find many of our cultural histories, many of our stories that embodied human rights fully in their nature, and helping people, helping stakeholders, helping participants within the UNA program to begin to trace those elements of human rights and to begin to understand that human rights in and of themselves are not far divorced from who we are as Africans and are not far divorced from our society as Africans. And making that link also and beginning to see that several years before the distortion of colonization, we also had so many women in places of authority. We had women who led things. We had women at the heights in power in society. And once participants, once stakeholders were able to make those connections, then the receptivity towards introducing the gender discourse and why it is necessary in the context of our urban natural assets within Africa, and specifically within the cities which we've been working, changed. And so I think that one major entry point and one major lesson for us as an UNA team has been the ways in which we introduce this discourse in society with stakeholders, and whether we're bringing on board this discourse as a purely Western concept, or whether people are able to connect and make those connections from a very traditional perspective and from a very personal level, and based on that, able to now make those connections and say, this is why we believe gender rights are important and should be important in our context. Thank you, Terry.
Thanks, Fumi. And yeah, I think that that's critical in how we're framing the UNA project going forward, is to see that human rights have always been with us, and how can we actually change that mindset. And that's already starting in the workshops that we're having in the engagements with the cities. Given that KDI has also done a lot of co-production processes and a lot of engagement with communities, I'd like to also, Sabrina, ask you the same question. So, you know, we know women are underrepresented. How can we actually encourage and ensure women are part of this co-production process? And that, you know, what are these mechanisms to actually build gender representation within these processes?
Thank you, Taryn, and thanks, Fumi, for this good introduction. As I touched a bit on it in the introduction, we are working as well on nature-based solutions, and mainly with people who live in informal settlements or low-income neighborhoods. So in my responses, I will have a bias towards those environments. When talking about equal representation, I think that's really desirable, but we also need to, besides thinking about the equal representation, think about how do we make representation meaningful, or encourage active participation within being present in our engagement. So we focus a lot on how to plan and design our engagements in a meaningful way. And for me, it's very critical that any representation leads to active participation. So for that, we need to understand the inequities which might hinder women from participating actively. And when we recognize or identify those barriers, we can overcome them in our co-design processes. And so I think within the processes we have been developing, we need to consider, as I said, these barriers, and those can be related to the fact that women often have to balance care work with paid work, and then deciding whether I attend a workshop or not, or a participation process. And so it becomes very critical to think about like simple things like, where are we locating the venue for any participation process? How far is it away from the people who we are targeting? What's the accessibility of the venue? Apart from that, we need to consider the time of the day, when are women available, how long can we last an engagement. You know, we need to limit it to a certain amount of time so that women can balance those different responsibilities they carry. Also, how do we make sure women feel free to express themselves in engagements? So here we need to, of course, have an understanding of cultural dynamics, traditions, etc. And how do we go about those? We need to be critical on who facilitates sessions. So, do a conscious selection of who's the facilitator of the session, and which kind of facilitation methods we use. Do we separate women from men, or do we actually strategically put them together to create an understanding among each other about the different struggles they have? But in doing that, sometimes that needs to be moderated carefully, again, to encourage free expression. Further, I think it's very important to think about language. As said, often women don't have the opportunity, or girls don't have the opportunity to continue their education, which often leads to knowing their mother tongue more than, let's say, maybe English, or when we are in other contexts with the other languages. So speaking the local language, speaking in an easy to understand language, and considering also that maybe some of the women who participate might not be literate. So what kind of materials to use to illustrate, what to talk about, how to speak about nature-based solutions. It's quite an abstract term, so how do we break it down to people, but through with visualizations rather than complicated text posters, etc. And one other thing, I think there are many different ways of how these sessions can be facilitated. You can do role plays, you can do scenario building, and I think there's many more more ways of doing it, but it needs to be a conscious choice of how to go about creating an understanding for each other.
Thanks, Sabrina. And I really love the explanations you gave, and that it's about actually taking a step back and planning forward and thinking more about the context rather than just that tick box exercise of X number of people came. Let's kind of tick that box. I think some of the insights you shared feed beautifully into the next question, which I'd actually like to pose to Sarah. So Sarah, I hope your internet's okay. But what we wanted to actually ask is, in terms of gender sensitive projects, there's quite a few that have emerged that are essentially just playing lip service to gender without actually having meaningful action, just to kind of satisfy donor, as we said in the beginning, those archaic tick box exercises, number of women attending. Can you share some of your thoughts on how important it is to make sure that gender mainstreaming is really effective in project implementation, and maybe any thoughts on gender action plans or experience from your own projects?
Thank you, Vanessa. My prayer is that I am heard. Do you hear me?
I'm just wondering if we turn off our videos for a minute, maybe that would help.
Hello.
Hi, Sarah. Sorry, we're just going to turn off our videos and see if that makes the line a bit better. Do you want to start again? Let's see if that makes it any better.
Hello.
A little bit. Hi, go ahead. Let's have a go.
Hello.
Let's see.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm really sorry that my network is not good. We have some weather changes, so there's a lot of wind blowing around. So back to your question. Gender sensitiveness in relation to projects. A little bit of my background and what I do. Our network is a network of the urban dwellers, specifically people who stay in slums and informal settlements, and our major aim is to mobilize ourselves into 7 groups, which is women to have a platform challenges that they are going through addressing as women. So right from our sessions, so in projects are thought about specifically think projects are more a small role in project development. Projects we do one, we tend to lean towards what affects women most, and such issues such as water, sanitation, housing, and even livelihood projects. And so in this case, if it comes to projects, everyone is affected. A man, a woman, a youth, a child is affected. Disabled are affected. So it is very critical that we bring everybody on board. And specifically what I will share is about how we do our project developments in terms of sanitation blocks. Remember, women are very vulnerable. They are a key critical nature, a human life, in that a woman deserves a decent place of cleaning herself, a decent place of washroom. So in project design and development, women play a very key central role in that they know what they want. So when it comes to sanitations, they are the forefront of playing a role in planning what kind of sanitation block they need and what kind of sanitation unit that they deserve as women. And so this is geared towards bringing them up to speak in group meetings, in project planning meetings, in designing times, such that their voices are heard because they deserve what they feel they need. And so it is critical in that when we are having projects, leave alone tangible projects, but even these other projects that may be run in terms of maybe giving capacity to people, maybe helping a community to do a particular activity, women should be at the forefront because they know where it pinches most. I'll take you to the level of who is affected when it comes to a family life. Most it is women. Disasters, women suffer. Go to poverty, women suffer because she's the one looking for food, making sure that the children have eaten, making sure the husband has eaten, making sure everyone else at home has put on or has a clothes to put on. So we need to incorporate. We shouldn't say this is for women, this is for men. No, when we are designing activities, everyone matters. A child or a youth, disabled, a woman, a man should all be on board so that everyone whose responsibility is realized, everyone whose issue is captured and worked upon so as to be satisfying as we develop these projects. So this is critical to us in that, in slum areas or urban areas, women are affected most. Yes, men are affected, but women are affected most in that in slum areas where you don't have a toilet, where you don't have water, a woman walks long distances from where she stays to go and look for a toilet. So she's affected. The reason she should be part and parcel of the project planning and the designing, in that they know where to fix. If it is a public project, where they are fixed so that to avert the effects that come a long way when they're developing such programs. And also when it comes to child care, you find that things centered around that is a woman at the center role. So we shouldn't say because men know how to plan better, so we go with men. No, let's
Thanks, Sarah. I think we got you right up until the end, that everybody matters.
So that women play a very key role in everything that is done. I think for now I can end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Sorry, it just cut off right at the end, but I think we got the majority that women should be at the forefront and that they're critical in projects, but also that everybody matters. And I think those examples and those comments feed nicely into the next question, where you mentioned the importance of planning. So I'd like to ask Nana Anna, you know, women account for half of the world's population and half of the world's resource managers. So it makes them really indispensable when it comes to environmental protection. So how can we really ensure that women's representation in law, policy and practice in terms of environmental protection in African cities? Nana Anna, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you so much, Taryn. Yes, so from my background as a lawyer, the first step to me is to even recognize that there are different gender roles and responsibilities and needs. So after recognizing and being aware of the existence of those needs, then you would have to take a step to be responsive to the needs, the responsibilities, or the roles. And we could do so by mainstreaming. So the first step is to mainstream gender in all the laws, policies, and every working document that affects environmental protection in Ghana, in Africa, anyway. So what it means is that right from the drafting of the law, there must be a conscious effort to mainstream gender. This means that there must be an effort to go down to the grassroots, to understand the various roles and responsibilities they have, to understand their needs, and then fine-tune solutions to address their needs. Otherwise, when we fail to engage them at the grassroots, especially the women and the vulnerable, what happens is that we often may want to rely on the gatekeepers, who are often the chiefs, the assemblymen, who are often the leaders in society, who often are men. We would want to rely on them for their inputs. And because they face different needs, or they have different roles, they have different needs, their solutions may be different. So it's important that right from the onset, both men and women are given an equal opportunity to participate in the development of these laws and policies. Then, even in the implementation stage, in the monitoring stage, in the evaluation stage, there should still be a conscious effort to mainstream gender and ensure that women are heard. Women, we would have to evaluate and ascertain that the roles and the needs of women are being met by the laws or the policies that we are coming up with. So I think that women involvement should start right from the bottom up and not from up to bottom. So it's essential that in having laws that support women, we involve women in the drafting stage. We even need to go down to the communities, if possible, engage the women group separately from the men group, if that is what will suit the context, and then ascertain what exactly their needs are, and then come up with interventions that will address the specific needs of each of them, instead of assuming that the leaders or assuming that the gatekeepers have all the information and will be able to give meaningful contribution to the development of the law. So I think that it starts from the design stage and then right up to the implementation and the monitoring. And then even when you are evaluating whether a policy or a law has served its purpose, there should still be a conscious effort at mainstreaming gender and then ascertaining whether women have been positively affected by the law or not.
Thank you so much. And I loved your quote about we need to balance the needs and balance the voices. I think that that's such a good description of both projects and policy governance. So leading on to that, Veronica, I would like to come to you. And, Nana Anna shared a bit about the legal side. We've heard a bit about the project side. But when we're looking at how we achieve gender equity in cities, we know that historically there's a lot of inequality in terms of gender in society and practices and laws. So how do we move forward? How do we look at achieving gender equity in our cities and our urban areas?
Thank you very much, Taryn. We all know that in our different societies, gender equity or equality remains to be a challenge, in as much as much focus is being put on it now. We, in the first instance, may look at giving girls the access to free, quality, and compulsory education. Like in Sierra Leone presently, we have free education. To have it, the quality remains to be a collective responsibility of all. So if we are looking at achieving gender equality, we will look at focusing on girl-child education. And because in some situations, parents may not have equal opportunities to educate their children, if the government comes in to give them access to free quality education and compulsory education, it may augur well. Then women are sometimes left out in leadership positions, especially in decision making. We have few women at the top making decisions. And I want to believe in giving women the platforms to take leadership positions and even contribute will make me standing okay. That will give them the opportunity to talk on women's issues, to contribute for issues affecting on women and girls, so that at least at the policy making level, they are being represented. And again, yes, we may say representation is key, but are they having the equal representation as the men counterparts? That is how or why we see it's necessary to have more women in leadership positions. Then also to establish policies to end violence, especially sexual violence, assaults against women. Gender equity has to start from the homes. We see women being left out in even talking about raising their voices about issues hindering them to forge ahead, tampering with even their human rights. So we have to look at policies that give them the leverage to voice out, create opportunities for them to speak about issues affecting them right from the house, from their respective homes, be it with their spouses, other relatives, or community members. So government also policies have to look at such issues. Then, of course, we see families taking their girl children into marriages, early marriage, as a sort of mitigating their situation at a given time. That also militates against us as women in this part of the world. We see child marriage being so much in our communities, people encouraging them. We also have to look at policies trying to calm down hard on people engaging in such practices. Girls should be let alone to be girls, should be given equal opportunities to education, to skills training, to livelihood skills. So at least when that is assured, when that is being done, they know how to speak even about their rights either being violated or tampered with. Then also, even about the physical, the personal health of the girl child. That is so key. We see the girl child from being a girl into womanhood, the menstrual cycle. These are things that the girls should be informed about. Because when they know about the person, when they know what they go through as a woman or as a girl, then they may have chances to take care of them well, and even to take care of their unborn children well. So issues of that has to be included in curriculum, in education. Let them know about themselves. You may not talk about what you don't know. You may not practice what you may not know. So it is key that they also know about that. Then, of course, when we talk about making policies that enhance the issues I have just highlighted, we also may not lose sight of bringing the legal framework into perspective, because when the policy is being flouted, what happens? When it comes to violence against women and girls, what happens? Are the perpetrators to be left free on the streets? That creates an impact that even gives the tendency to family members to try to just dampen the spirit of an incident that needs to be taken up with authorities. Like if a girl or woman is being raped, such incident has happened in her community. After a short while, the perpetrator is being seen freely walking around. Nothing happened to that perpetrator. So it gradually seems that, yes, this is a norm of the society, it has to be done, and that has to be frowned at. So the legal framework in order to promote gender equality and women's empowerment should be looked at. We should not lose sight of that. I want to believe, considering all these issues put together, achieving gender equity or equality would be amenable.
Thank you so much. And I think, one of the critical aspects you mentioned was the fact that we need more women leaders, and we need to build that education. And I think that goes to my next question. I know we started late, so I'm looking at the time. We have about 25 minutes left. So I'd like to do almost a rapid fire round with the panel, so that we do have time.
Let me just come in, Taryn.
Sorry?
Yes, let me just bring you clear examples. My city council have 17 ward councillors. Just 3 are females. You can beat that. There is the district council from where I come from, the district where I come from. they have 24 councillors. All of them are men. You can see what I'm talking.
Yeah. And I think that relates directly to the next question. So we have, for the panel, we have about 25 minutes left. I think Veronica's screen has just frozen. So we have about 25 minutes left. So if I can ask each of the panelists just for short feedback on the next question, and then I'd like to move to the participants in the room and give them the opportunity for reflection and questions. So for me, if I can come to you and just ask, relating directly to what Veronica was saying about, we need more women in our power structures, we need better representation. So from your perspective, can we assume that achieving gender equality involves everybody, not just women? And in this case, what are some of the ways we can support this movement towards gender equality? So can we effectively engage men? And what are your thoughts? But if we can keep the responses short so that we've still got some time to engage with the delegates.
Thanks, Taryn. And this ties in very nicely with a question by Nicole on the chat platform. I would first on this question by saying, yes, gender equality is everybody's problem. It is not just a women's problem. Because at the end of the day, and while I've said that, I must say that the cost of gender inequality is borne mainly by women, but not solely by women. Because initially, it doesn't look like there's any cost for men, but a couple of years and a couple of decades down the line, men begin to bear the cost also of gender equality, of gender inequality, and sooner or later, everyone is affected by it. And what are some mitigating factors, I think? First, let me just quickly add on to the discussions that had gone ahead. And the one thing I want to say is that while I respect the place of policies and programs, and I absolutely do believe that we need it, I think that a greater push and pull for me will be political will. And that is what I think is usually missing from the discussion in enforcing gender equality, specifically within an African context. Now, many African countries, right from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to so many international and regional documents, and even within their national laws and even within their constitution, on the surface level, respect gender equality and have provisions for gender equality. The actual problem comes in enforcing. So it comes from issues of, number one, the disparity of children in school between girls and boys and how to ensure equal access to education for everybody. It also comes when you begin to speak to issues around platforms for women to be in power and to achieve economic access. When you look around the world, and specifically within African countries, besides Rwanda, how many African countries have actually been able to achieve gender balance? Say, let's start from parliament and from the higher echelon. And when you drive that down to the grassroots level, even within local government, you keep finding the missing key element of states at whatever level, whether federal, whether state, whether local, wanting to enforce issues around gender equality. Also, is the issue, another way, is the issue of child marriage. And I know it seems like I keep harping on this, but it's a serious issue within the context of Africa, which continues to drive gender inequality between boys and girls, between men and women, ending all forms of violence against women, like Veronica had earlier said. And then there's also the space for men to actually come in on the fight for gender equality, with the recognition that gender equality also affects them one way or the other. And the example I usually like to give, for instance, is the societal norm whereby you ask a woman and you say that a woman is not entitled to protein, for instance, until the head of the house, who is a man, has protein. And that woman is carrying a male child in her belly. But because her husband doesn't have access to protein, she continues to deny herself until she gives birth to a child. And we all know that the first 1,000 days of a child's life are the most important. Now, in utero, she has deprived that child. When that child is born, because she continues to push these gender stereotypes and practices, she continues to deny the child. And then we have a child who is undernourished or malnourished, cannot perform in school. And then when you the multiplier effect over 20 years, that child becomes a dropout because the child is unable to cope in school, and then that child is not able to achieve some level of economic success and access. Now, it doesn't matter that that child is a male child. That child has been affected by gender inequality. And those are the ways we need to begin to rethink how gender inequality affects us as a society, and why men need to be allowed into the space for advocacy. And there are roles for other actors, including mass media, including the advocacy within the workplace, advocacy in schools. I think I should stop here so that I do not take all the time of other panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Fumi. And I hope our next panelist, Sabrina, will forgive me for doing this. But I think related to what Fumi was just saying, and it also kind of addresses one of the questions in the chat. Sabrina, I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it, but Nicole was asking, in workshops on gender equality, a small group of men highlighted that gender also includes the concerns of men, and that focusing on women's empowerment is discrimination against men. She's saying that she struggles to get them to move off this topic, and it also seems to shut down the discussions for women in the workshop. She doesn't know if there's any suggestions on this. So I thought maybe, would you have some thoughts on this based on your initial inputs in the earlier questions about how you've been looking at mainstreaming gender? Would you have any thoughts you could share? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, I think with creating an understanding for one another, what has helped on other topics, but also within workshops where we try to address gender inequities. I think one very useful activity is to go through scenarios, or just go through scenarios that could be a day in the life of a woman or a child, through which you follow how they engage with, I'm coming from a urban planner's perspective, with their environment and so on, and pose questions against that reality. So I think you kind of need to find a way to open people's or participants, understanding of the reality for different societal groups, and that can be, for women, this can be for girls, but can also be for young people, because the way they experience their environment is very different. It can be done through storytelling. It can be done through following a person throughout their day to understand which kind of challenges they face. And if it's not, direct, it can be something which is recorded, something which is not happening within the workshop itself, but engaging with the story of someone and making it real sometimes helps, and I think the segregation within workshops also helps. It can sometimes be strategic not to do that, but if there are barriers for speaking, if there are barriers or accusations within a mixed session, then separating people is important and can help. So having a male group of participants engage with the story or a narrative of the life of someone who's female can help. And of course, the facilitator needs to be conscious of maybe the stereotypes which can come up and then address them. I think there are, as I said before, there are many ways of doing this, and if people are interested, we worked on a handbook on gender-sensitive planning and design together with the World Bank. This is accessible online. If you are interested in finding more methods and, you know, step-by-step indications of how you can do it, feel free to look it up. I can also share the link. But yeah, so I think trying to create an understanding for each other's reality is very important, and there are many, many different ways of doing that. In the spirit of creativity, you know, you need to try to find creative ways. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Sabrina. And again, sorry to put you on the spot with that question. I'd like to go to Nana Anna now, and just kind of reflecting on what Fumi and Sabrina mentioned, and what you said kind of earlier in the session about the fact that we need to balance these needs and balance these voices. From your perspective, you know, when you've been doing gender planning, gender policy, have you come across these kind of barriers where it almost becomes men versus women? And do you have any case studies or examples that you could share, and maybe how you've overcome this in terms of trying to mainstream gender into your environment or your climate plans and policies?
Okay, thank you, Taryn. Some barriers you've encountered include language. So the women need to be spoken to in a language that they understand, and the correct medium must be used, so that if you go into a community where they understand their indigenous language, then it's expected that you would relate to them on that level. If you choose a different language they are not familiar with, then you would not get them coming out and then sharing their views. One other important thing is timing. The time when you would want to meet women should be very convenient for them. We know that women generally bear about 3 major roles. They have their reproductive roles, they have their productive roles, and they have their communal roles. So the reproductive roles include the roles that the woman has for childbearing, for taking care of the home, taking care of the children, taking care of people within the home. And then the communal includes attending funerals, caring for the aged, caring for the sick, and all that. And then they have their productive roles where they would have to go out and then bring in some sort of income. So it's important that timing is considered before issues of women can be talked about. For instance, my personal case, you will not get me anytime before 8 a.m. because between 4 and 8, I am taking care of the home, and then I'm getting my children ready for school. So if you fix a consultative meeting or an engagement at 7 or 7:30, as a woman, you will not find me there, because that is the time I also take care of my home. So it's important that we remove some of these barriers by engaging with them to know when it's convenient for them, so that they can participate. They can participate and engage usefully. And then it's also important that we know that we should create favorable spaces for them. Obviously, if you would want to engage with a woman, you should find a more convenient place for them, which is not so far away from the home, so that if they are getting late, they can rush back and take care of the home. So it's very important that some of these barriers should be removed, so that it will assist the women to actively participate in the production, in the creation of such projects. I also want to add that when you involve the women right from the onset, it's easier for them to take ownership of the project. They would accept the project because they were part of the project right from the onset, and then they will work with the project. And it's easier for them to comply if, for instance, there are some other laws or some other policies regarding their actions or inactions. So it's important that these barriers which prevent them from actively being engaged, actively participating, should be removed, because when they are removed, then they make things easier for the women to participate. We know that women have so many roles and they may be burdened with some of these responsibilities. Generally, women do not participate most women do not participate in the political space because they are overly burdened with responsibilities that they cannot add on to the responsibilities. So when we have support, for instance, from spouses, from family, from the society, from the nation, then it's easier for the women to take on added responsibilities, to venture into the political space, to venture into the social space, and to actively participate in projects or policies or engagements which border on climate change or environmental protection. So I am of the view that the first step is to remove the barriers. When you remove it and you co-produce it with them, then they will own it, and then they would not see it as a desktop design which you are imposing on them, but then they will see it as emanating from them. So it is easier for them to walk through and actually see through the project.
Thanks so much, Nana Anna. And I think just building on that and, you know, really empowering women, I'd like to go back to Sarah and just find out from Sarah, in terms of the projects you're doing, you know, we spoke earlier about, you know, increasingly looking at gender sensitive projects. Is it just a tick box exercise? From kind of the projects and engagements you're doing, are you seeing transformation on the ground? Are you seeing changes? Are you seeing progress? Or do you feel that we still have a long way to go?
Okay, thank you for that question. Yeah, from our own perspective, there is a bit of great change in terms of our projects that are implemented as regards to gender sensitivity. One, I want to assure you that while we do projects, women are working up. Imagine these are women who did not study too far. They are primarily this first level education, but we have had women move on positions to even take up political positions just because they have been engaging, they have been interacting, they have been trying to hustle here and there to make sure ends meet. And by so doing, interacting with different partners, women have got that voice to speak up. And by so speaking up, they've been able to engage in political positions. Local councillors, last elections we had in the country, most of our members, they had to stand in for politics, and indeed, they are politicians. Besides that, women have been empowered to take up leadership roles, even in places of like organizations like church, even their own groups. You'd find that you set a saving group and no woman can speak. But by the end of 1 year, this woman is able to engage with the mayor, with the town clerk, demanding for their rights, demanding for services, and speaking even in front of so many people to ensure that their point is heard. Even besides that, women have been able to understand what is for them and what is not for them, which was not the case before. Now a woman would say, you can't do something minus me if it is for me, which has changed the notion that women should stay and wait for them to be worked for. Now women are like, no, we have to be part of the process. So there is change. However, I will not say that is 100% change. There is still challenges that women face. Of course, being marginalized, that who is this woman standing before me to speak, it still exists. Men do not want to believe that women have a role to play in certain areas. And we've seen women having been battered, domestic violence, because a woman speaks up to speak. This has gone down as far as family level. A woman trying to create change in the family or create change in the community. The husband looks at her like she's now coming up like to get that leadership role, so she will overpower the man. That is all domestic violence. So we have seen that much as women are trying to get positions that can make them be heard and make their case known, there are also those hassles that they are going through. Even as they go to politics, men look at them like, no, you wait, you can't be here. So, but women try to force themselves to make sure that they get those leadership positions. So those are some of the challenges that women still go through. And the fact that they are breadwinners in the families, the fact that they are closer to their children, the burden has been shifted, that women now take control of everything almost. Because a woman is in a saving group, is having a business, is doing because of the savings, the family role is now shifting to the woman. So you realize that there is a burden shift from the man looking for what to do for the family to a woman taking a center role in doing that, which is somehow hard for women and a bit hectic for them. And this calls for maybe some reshape that men should still continue with their roles as women support them, which is still hard for women to do. Yeah, that's what I can say.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'd like to just take what you said and actually come to Veronica, because I think we've got a few more minutes that we can then still ask questions. So Veronica, based on Sarah's input about the fact that, you know, we need empowerment, it is happening, it's got to happen across different levels, but that, you know, there's still gaps. And that relates to what you mentioned earlier about that we need more women represented, we need a better gender balance within kind of power structures and different levels of governance. Can I ask, are there any kind of programs or projects or visions planned within your city or maybe your neighboring cities, or perhaps even from national government, that are trying to actually facilitate and support that movement towards more equal representation that you're aware of? Veronica, I'm not sure, are you still there? Is the connection okay?
Hello, I'm there, but
Hey.
having serious challenge with the connectivity.
I'm sorry.
You are coming in broken. Yeah.
Can you
please
repeat?
Yeah.
Sure. So I'm not sure how much you heard about what Sarah was saying, but just briefly before we go into a few questions, if we have the time, just to ask you, in terms of what you mentioned earlier, which kind of builds on what Sarah was saying now, are there any initiatives or any kind of strategies, any plans within your city or maybe even at national government to try and support a better gender balance within the different levels of governance, so that there are kind of more representation from women within those structures?
Well, yeah, you know, like I said earlier on, from the councils are semi-autonomous. So as such, planning at our own level has to do with us. We have a group that we call, who work with the councillors, Ward Development Committee members. And these are drawn from the communities. We have 10 of them, and it is incumbent that there are 5 women and 5 men in such committees. So as such, we expect those women on those committees in terms of planning, when we want to review our development plans, they are so key. We have, of course, an open session wherein all community members are invited. Those that avail themselves bring up issues that they feel very necessary to be attended to by the council. So as such, those issues are later brought up to the committee. The committee takes care, ensures that it is being directed to the councillor, and councillor brings it to council. We deliberate on it. If it has to do with gender issues, the gender committee of council sits on it, deliberates, expunge what should be expunged and bring forward what has been agreed to the general membership of the council. And we are in council endorses that for action. So that is being handed over to the operational wing, which I'm head, and we operationalize it, making programs to have that happen. So in actual fact, really, I think removing the obstacles are so key, like as another speaker mentioned, barriers. So when that is being done, we see total participation of women in activities that we are doing. Like for health, we have our peripheral health units wherein bulk of the clients are being, or patients are being women, that girls or women or under fives that are children. So this data of such units are being taken into consideration. What do we do to at least upgrade such a peripheral health unit wherein we have more women running there to give birth? Can we upgrade to a BEMOC center so that it becomes at least conducive for such an activity, wherein they will not be seen running to the main referral hospital, wherein they will be overwhelmed? So we take into cognizance all those sorts of things. And coming to education, we have, of course, mixed schools, wherein we have girls and boys. Looking at the sanitation issues in the schools, do we have conducive atmosphere as far as sanitation is concerned for the girls? We have girls that are already at puberty, they can see their menses. What do they do if a girl remains in school, so that happens to her? Will she have to go home to do that? No. So activities are that we have women's groups that we work with, they pick up such activities that are being thrown into our programs that we do. So, and on the broader perspective, the central government's will, that is the political will, is gradually coming up, because even from the central level, activities of such nature is being cascaded. They expect us as the council level to implement those activities. We work as implementing partners to implement those activities, so ensure that the beneficiaries are really taken on board and what is expected to be done is carried out.
So I think, Veronica, that's an amazing comment that, you know, there's actually a lot happening at the local level with this being semi-autonomous, and just so many opportunities for other cities to learn. I'd like to ask now if all of the panelists can just turn their cameras on, if the networks allow. And I'd like to see if there's any questions. We are going to have to end shortly, but I feel that we started a bit late, so we should give it a little bit of an opportunity if our technical team do not kick us out. So either maybe if there's a question, you're welcome to type it into the chat, or you can raise your hand. And if you have a question that you would like to share with the panel, please do so. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat or raised hands. Oh, I see Dorothy. Did I see your hand raised? Or did I imagine it? Okay, I can see Veronica's hand raised. Veronica?
Yep. I just don't want us to lose sight of sustainable opportunities for women, especially in making them economically viable. Because looking at women's participation, whether at the local level or sub-national level, has to do with your economic stand. Because as local councils, that is where we have the bulk of the challenges in working with women.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk to women at the grassroots level, all their concerns are about, can you help us so that we can stand on our own, we can be seen doing things for ourselves, that we may not be looking forward to handouts and this. So I don't know, in as much as we are looking at gender equity vis-a-vis environmental issues or urban natural assets, we equally may not want to lose sight of that. That's just a comment I want to make.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And yeah, if anyone else wants to reflect on that comment, please do add into the chat. I see there's a comment, is it from Emma, saying it was mentioned how to disrupt gender thinking through education for the next generation, but what interventions can we use to target more psychological barriers already in place for all genders? Unlearning expectations, norms of what's appropriate, what's feminine, what's women's work. So I'm not sure from the panelists if anybody wants to respond to Emma's question about how we disrupt this gender thinking and how we unlearn the terminology we've been using.
Thank you, Taryn. I think maybe I should just weigh in briefly here. I think I had mentioned it briefly in trying to, I don't think that gender equality, the work of gender equality and moving towards gender equality is women's work only. It's a whole of society approach. If we are ever to get to that point where we will say there's truly gender equality. And beyond men, there are other systems, the same systems which up until now have entrenched patriarchal norms and patriarchal values are the same systems which we must begin to use to disrupt them. And one very key factor is the media. Are we using the media, and how and just from a feminist perspective and from a feminist thinking, how are we using media to begin to disrupt the current status quo and to move towards gender equality? Or are we just hoping that all the bulk of the work will be done by women alone? Because at the end of the day, that's also entrenching what we're trying to fight. Women having to do everything to get to a certain position. So I think that whether we're going to use social media, whether we're going to use mass media, there's a point at which we must also use the media in fighting back against gender inequality. I also think that education is a big disruptor. But again, if you look at education, and particularly in the context of Africa and across Africa, I'm originally from Nigeria, although I've been in South Africa for over a decade now. You open up certain textbooks, and I'm not talking about 3 years ago, I'm talking of as late as end of last year. There's this particular subject called social studies. You open up a social studies textbook, and these are grade 2, grade 3, and you see things like daddy's job is to sit and watch TV in the evening while mommy cooks. And you begin to ask yourself questions. If patriarchy is entrenched from this young, the grade 1s, the grade 2, what are we doing to actually begin to speak about gender equality to young girls, to young boys, and to begin to disrupt? So when we talk about education, I'm not talking about educating only high school kids. I'm talking about starting that education from as little as 4 years old, 5 years old. It's as much as letting a girl know, the girl child know that she can be anything she aspires to be. is as much as telling the young boy in the home to pick up a broom and sweep the home as well as his sister also. Those are the little ways in which we begin to drive change, in which we begin to say, you know what, we want a new world, a better world for the generations coming after us. But if that is ever going to happen, then it needs to start happening from here and from now.
Thanks for me. I see Nana Anna, your hand raised, but just before I come to you, because we are going to have to unfortunately close the session very soon. But I see there's two other questions in the chat, which I'd just like to flag to the panel. So one is related to the previous one, but how do we also include greater gender diversity in these discussions? And then the second one is, in addition to creating men's sensitivity to women's marginality and demanding their actions to change that narrative, it's also important to strengthen women-to-women support networks. This is vital because I see how women have stood behind male political contestants against their own women counterparts. So those are the two remaining questions we've got in the chat. So maybe Nana Anna, your hand was raised earlier. I'm not sure if you want to comment on what Fumi was commenting on earlier, or you want to share a thought about those two comments, because I think unfortunately we are going to have to make this the last brief comments from the panel. So Nana
Okay,
Anna?
so I want to comment on, thank you, Taryn. I want to comment on Veronica's point on the issue of empowering the women. I also side with her on that, and I think that women should be empowered to have other alternatives to livelihood. So if they are totally dependent on the natural assets and they are getting depleted and they are losing them, then they should have an alternative to this natural asset. So even in the urban area where there is virtually little land to farm or to do any agricultural business, we could, in our small spaces, participate in home gardening, in containers, in any little space you have, so that whatever they plant would be used to augment their dietary needs in the home. I also want to add that generally, when it comes to women participation, there must be a conscious effort to invest in participatory, multi-sectoral, and then multi-stakeholder engagement, so that you can have everyone's view on point. It isn't just for the woman to ensure, but it is for everybody to be involved. So you have everyone from every sector being involved, and that's what afford both men and women in equal portion to participate in, to contribute to, and to benefit from all initiatives based on their unique needs, their unique responsibilities, and their unique roles. That is what I wanted to add on.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I think that's critical. Can I ask if there's any other kind of final reflections from the other panelists? Sabrina, Sarah, Veronica? Okay. So we have gone, oh, sorry.
Sorry, just 1 minute. And so I apologize. I just wanted to quickly, it just came back to me, the question around gender equality being seen as discrimination against men. And I thought I should just quickly address that. There is a difference between equality and equity. And the fight for gender equality is not just about equality, but it's also about equity. Now, if you think of it in this light, and I will say probably the next time that comes up in the conference is a very good way to challenge that kind of notion. There are 3 people standing. There is a 4-foot fence. One person is 4 foot, the other person is 2 foot, and the last person is 6 foot. Now, they are all given something, a stoop to stand on that is 1 foot for everybody. Clearly, the person who is 6 foot is going to be the only person who will see. Maybe the person who is 4 foot will see just a little bit, but the person who is 2 foot and has only 1 foot to move up to be able to see up to a 5-foot fence will still not be able to see. And that's the way we must view the discourse on gender equality. Men already have an advantage. And what we're trying to do as women right now, when we advocate for women, is to try to play catch up. to say, let's level the playing field. Because if men continue to play on the advantage which centuries and generations have already given them based on patriarchy, women will never be able to meet up. And so the discourse around gender equality is not to discriminate against men, it is to level the playing field, such that everybody has a playing field that is level and that we can all equally contribute to society.
Thanks, Fumi. And I think that's a great statement to end on. I'm just going to ask my colleague Erin, before we say goodbye to all the panelists and the participants, Erin can drop in some information and links to the UNA project and the Urban Natural Asset project. I've seen Sabrina and your colleagues have dropped in some links to the KDI project. I think, Sarah, if there's any links to the projects in Uganda with SDI, and Veronica, Nana Anna, if there's any links you want to share, please do drop them in the chat so that people can follow up. We'd welcome the engagement. So I think from our side, firstly, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our panelists. I know I personally have learned a lot today. I think this was probably the first of many discussions, and I think there's still a long way to go and a lot of opportunity moving forward. We've spoken a lot about women, but you know, there's been comments about equity versus inequality, gender diversity. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the conversations we can have going forward about power dynamics, about what are these amazing mechanisms that we can actually use in workshops, use in our processes, use in our engagements to actually foster better mainstreaming and ultimately transformation on the ground, which is what we want in our projects. We don't want tick box exercises. So I'd like to firstly thank the panel. Ladies, you have been amazing. It's been wonderful to learn from you and to hear your insights. And I hope you'll continue to engage with UNA, with our partners on this call moving forward to really make sure that we're leading in the field and innovating when it comes to mainstreaming gender and human rights-based approaches. To everybody who sat through the session with us today, the recording will be available online. So you're welcome to share it with your colleagues. And as we say, we're starting this discussion. It will be running for the duration, at least, of the UNA project. So we'd welcome you to be part of that engagement. We'd also like to invite you to the remaining RISE Festival. Today's the launch. We've got the rest of the week. And as you saw from the video at the beginning, we've got so many exciting sessions. So please do come, engage, think and do, and join us in these conversations. We have another UNA session, which is taking place tomorrow afternoon, which is really exciting. And it's talking about what are nature-based solutions. So we say this term NBS, we say nature-based solutions, but what does that terminology mean? African cities are doing things on the ground, but we're not labeling them as nature-based solutions. So what are we talking about using this jargon? What do we mean, and how can we elevate our projects and better profile what's happening in our cities? So that's taking place tomorrow, but we have many, many other sessions. We'd invite you to join. And just before departure, there will be a link in the chat also to the survey. We'd welcome you to add to it, to take a few minutes to fill it in. That will define our engagements with RISE going forward. So thank you so much to everybody for your time. Thank you to our amazing panel, and we hope to see you in future RISE sessions this week. Thank you, everybody, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're coming from. Thank you for being with us today.